Hello, and welcome to an interview in history. This week, we'll be talking with that historic king, Henry VIII, who was King of England. Henry is known for his 6 marriages and his efforts to have his first marriage annulled. His disagreement with Pope Clement VII about such an annulment led Henry to initiate the English Reformation, separating the Church of England from papal authority. He appointed himself supreme head of the Church of England and dissolved covenants and monasteries, for which he was excommunicated by the Pope. This interview takes place in October of 1546. Welcome, Henry VIII. Let's start from the beginning. Tell us a bit about your early life.
Yes, my early life. Well, I was born on the 28th of June, 1491, at Greenwich Palace, to Henry VII and Elizabeth of York. I was their second son, and as such, I wasn't initially meant to be king. My older brother Arthur was the heir, so my early years were spent more in preparation for a life in the church rather than one on the throne. I was well educated, though. Languages, theology, music, hunting, everything a noble young prince should learn. It was a peaceful time under my father, who was keen to secure the Tudor dynasty after the War of the Roses. Well, speaking of your family, can you tell us more about your siblings? Of course. I had an older brother, Prince Arthur, 2 sisters, Margaret and Mary. Arthur, as I mentioned, was the heir. He married Catherine of Aragon, but died at 15, which changed everything for me. Suddenly, I was next in line for the throne. My sister Margaret became Queen of Scotland through her marriage to James IV, and Mary became Queen of France, though her time as queen was short, as her husband Louis VII died soon after their marriage. Both of them played significant roles in European politics during my reign, and their marriages helped strengthen ties with our neighbors.
Arthur's death must have been a pivotal moment in your life, as it led to your becoming king. How did that affect you?
Yes, Arthur's death set the course for my future. I wasn't raised to be king, but when the time came, I embraced it. I married Catherine of Aragon, my brother's widow, to maintain the alliance with Spain. That marriage was key to keeping political ties strong, but of course it was the beginning of much drama later in my life. Becoming king at the age of 17 brought a new sense of purpose. I wanted to be a monarch of action, unlike my cautious father. I sought glory through war, and to establish England as a powerful force.
You've been married 6 times, and those marriages are a defining part of your legacy. What led to these unions, and how did they shape your reign?
My wives. I've been much judged for that. My first marriage to Catherine of Aragon lasted over 20 years. She was a good queen and wife, but after many years without a male heir, I grew desperate. I needed a son to secure my line, and Catherine had only given me a daughter, Mary. My desire for a male heir and my growing infatuation with Anne Boleyn led me to break with Rome when the Pope refused to annul my marriage. Anne and I wed in 1533, and she gave birth to another daughter, Elizabeth. She was later executed when I accused her of treason and infidelity. After Anne came Jane Seymour, who gave me my long-awaited son, Edward, though she tragically died shortly after childbirth. Then there was Anne of Cleves, A political marriage, I thought, to strengthen ties with Protestant Germany, but it wasn't a good match. We quickly annulled it. Catherine Howard was my fifth wife. She was young and beautiful, but also unfaithful, and I had her executed. Finally, Catherine Parr is my last wife. She's been a good companion and a stabilizing presence in these my later years. You mentioned your children. How do you view them and their roles in the kingdom? My children were everything to the future of England. Mary, my daughter with Catherine of Aragon, went on to become queen, though her reign was marred by her harsh attempts to return the country to Catholicism. Elizabeth, my daughter with Anne Boleyn, succeeded Mary and has become one of the greatest monarchs in our history. Her reign is known as the Elizabethan era, a time of prosperity and cultural flourishing. As for my son Edward, who was to become king, but at just 9 years old, was frail and died young. My children's reigns were a reflection of the religious and political upheavals that shaped my own life. As king, you enacted significant religious changes. How do you reflect on your decision to break from the Catholic Church? That decision was monumental. It began as a personal matter, seeking an annulment from Catherine of Aragon so I could marry Anne Boleyn. But when the Pope refused, I realized the power of the Church in Rome was too much for any English king to tolerate. So I declared myself the supreme head of the Church of England in 1534. This not only allowed me to control religious affairs in my kingdom, but it also filled my coffers by dissolving monasteries and seizing their wealth. The Reformation changed England forever. It was about more than my marriages. It was about sovereignty, power, and shaping the future of this kingdom. Your Majesty, what kind of king do you think you are? I believe I am the kind of king England needed. I have always seen myself as a strong, decisive ruler, a monarch who didn't shy away from hard decisions, even if they were controversial. Some say I am ruthless, but I have acted out of duty to my realm and my dynasty. I wanted to ensure England's security and independence, both politically and religiously. That's why I broke from Rome and created the Church of England. Because no foreign power, not even the Pope, should have control over English affairs. I have fought wars when necessary to defend my realm, and have pursued alliances to strengthen it. I see myself as a reformer, too. I am not content with simply maintaining the old ways. I have modernized the government and the military, expanded our navy, and encouraged new ways of thinking. I have built a legacy of power and change, even though the means were often harsh. My will is law, but I have done it all for England. So, in short, I believe I am a king of strength, vision, and ambition, one who is not afraid to defy tradition and to achieve greatness for my country. Your Majesty, I understand that you are quite an extravagant spender. Can you talk about that? First, young man, understanding that being the King of England, you have quite the audacity to ask that question. However, because of what we are doing here, I will grant you the answer. No, I would not consider myself an extravagant spender, but I did use proceeds from the dissolution of the monasteries and the acts of the Reformation Parliament. I converted money that was formerly paid to Rome into royal revenue. Despite the money from these sources, I have been often on the verge of financial ruin to some personal extravagance and costly and largely unproductive wars, particularly with King Francis I of France, Holy Roman Emperor Charles V, King James V of Scotland, and the Scottish Regency under the Earl of Arran and Mary of Guise. But I expanded the Royal Navy, oversaw the annexation of Wales to England with the Laws in Wales Act 1535 to 1542, and was the first English monarch to rule as King of Ireland. How well do you get along with other kings and kingdoms? My relationships with other kings and kingdoms have always been complicated, as they must be in the world of politics. As a monarch, one cannot afford to rely on friendships, only interests. Alliances can shift as easily as the wind changes direction. In my early years, I sought glory in war, particularly against France, like my ancestors. I led several campaigns there, and while I did claim victories, such as the capture of Boulogne, it was often costly. My relationship with French monarch Francis I was particularly tumultuous. At times, we were rivals competing for power, land, and prestige. But at other moments, we were allies, particularly when we both opposed the might of the Holy Roman Emperor Charles V. Speaking of Charles, he was both an ally and an adversary. Initially, I had strong ties with him, especially since he was the nephew of my first wife, Catherine of Aragon. But when I sought to divorce her and marry Anne Boleyn, Charles turned against me. His influence over the Pope certainly played a part in the Pope's refusal to grant me an annulment, which, of course, led to the English Reformation. I formed alliances when it suited my interests, like my marriage to Anne of Cleves, to strengthen ties with Protestant German states. But I was always careful to prioritize England's sovereignty and independence. If a king or emperor opposed me, they quickly became my enemy. So, while I maintained relations with other rulers, it was always with England's advantage in mind. I respected power and authority in others, but I made sure that no one ever underestimated my own. Diplomacy, like war, is about securing your legacy and your country's future. Your Majesty, I know when you were younger you were quite athletic, but as you have grown older you have changed a bit. Tell us about that. I have become a shadow of the young athletic king I once was. My health has deteriorated badly, and I'm plagued by various ailments, some of which are the result of injuries sustained earlier in life. One of the major factors that have contributed to my decline is an injury that I sustained during a jousting tournament in 1536. I was thrown from my horse, and the injury to my leg has never fully healed. Over the years, it has become ulcerated and caused me intense pain, making it difficult to walk. My increasing weight has made it worse. I was once tall and athletic, but now I have grown quite large to the size of over 300 pounds. Beyond the physical ailments, I'm also faced with the strain of my political and personal decisions. I've been married 6 times, executed 2 of my queens, and saw countless political figures, including some close to me, fall under the blade. The break with Rome left England divided, with religious turmoil throughout the latter part of my reign. These stresses have only compounded my suffering.
Your Majesty, with such monumental decisions and controversies throughout your reign, how would you like to be remembered?
I'd like to be remembered as a king who shaped England into a true power. Yes, my marriages, my break with Rome, and the way I dealt with dissent may seem controversial, but they were necessary to secure my dynasty and strengthen the kingdom. I brought political, religious, and cultural change, and ensured that the Tudors would not be forgotten. If anything, I hope history remembers my legacy as one of strength, power, and vision.
Thank you, Your Majesty. Your legacy will certainly leave an indelible mark on history.
Indeed, it was my destiny to reshape England, and so I did.
Henry VIII's life ended much as it was lived, marked by a combination of power but also pain. By the time of his death on January 28, 1547, ultimately, he died in the Palace of Whitehall, likely from complications related to his leg injury, obesity, and perhaps other health issues like diabetes or heart disease. His desire to secure the Tudor dynasty never wavered, even in his last days. He's buried next to his beloved third wife, Jane Seymour, in St. George's Chapel at Windsor Castle, as he always intended. She was the one who gave him his only male heir, Edward, and for that she earned a special place in his heart, even in death. In the end, his reign lasted 38 years, and though he faced many challenges, he left behind a legacy that reshaped England forever. Whether through his religious reforms or his children's reigns, he ensured that the Tudor name would never be forgotten. And now, another forgotten history. Anne Londonderry was the first woman to bicycle around the world. She was a Jewish Latvian immigrant to the U.S., born as Anne Cohen. When married, she became Anne Cohen Kopachowski, but she gained fame as Anne Londonderry. Anne was a 24-year-old mother of 3 children when, in 1894, she decided to ride a bicycle across the world. Her decision was driven by a bet, as 2 men wagered that no woman could ride across the world on her own. The challenge was to complete the journey within 15 months and earn $5,000 along the way. Her first source of income for the journey came from the Londonderry Lithia Spring Water Company. She received $100 to hang an advertisement from her bike and to be known as Anne Londonderry. Throughout her trip, she earned money by carrying ads and giving lectures. And just under 15 months after she started, Anne completed her ride and returned home to Boston. Join us next week when we talk with John Clem, who was an American general officer and who served as a drummer boy in the Union Army during the American Civil War. He gained fame for his bravery on the battlefield, becoming the youngest non-commissioned officer in the history of the United States Army at the age of 12. Until then, take care.